Sarah stood at the entrance of the mansion, cold raindrops sliding down her pale cheeks, mingling with something indistinguishable from tears, spotting the thin hospital gown a darker shade. She had just sneaked out of the hospital, the smell of antiseptic clinging to her, a scent that now felt like a prelude to decay, wrapping around her fragile body. The door opened. Robert Sterling stood in the light and shadow of the foyer, his strikingly handsome face devoid of expression, save for the swirling dark storm in his eyes that threatened to consume her. In his hand, he clutched several photos, holding them like poison blades, and flung them hard at her face. "Explain." His voice was colder than the rain outside, utterly devoid of warmth. The photos scattered across the wet ground, showing intimate shots of her with a strange man, the man gently supporting her leaning into his embrace, a weak smile on her face. It was Dr. Thomas Miller, her attending physician, who had helped her up when she nearly fainted in the hospital hallway again. But in Robert Sterling's eyes at this moment, it was undeniable proof of betrayal. Sarah parted her lips, her throat burning like it was clogged with hot coals, making it impossible to speak. She wanted to say, "No, it's not what you think," but the overworked heart in her chest gave a sharp lurch, bringing a piercing sense of suffocation. She doubled over, coughing violently, her thin shoulders trembling like leaves in the wind. "Humph." Robert Sterling let out a cold scoff, a laugh like icy needles pricking her heart relentlessly. "Sarah, what are you putting on a show for? Who is this pathetic act for, in front of me? Taking my money to support another man? You're really something." Every word was like a heavy hammer, pounding on her already fragile nerves. Money? He thought she did it for money? She clenched her fists, her nails digging deep into her palms, trying to use the pain to suppress the metallic taste rising in her throat. "I didn't." She finally squeezed out a few words, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "Didn't?" Robert Sterling advanced step by step, his tall frame radiating a powerful pressure that enveloped her. "Then what are these? Tell me, why did you reject me repeatedly? Why did you move out? Why were you always looking half dead? Turns out you'd already found someone else." His gaze was like a sharp knife, slicing through her, inch by inch, finally settling on her face, filled with thick, undeniable disgust and disappointment. The disappointment hurt her more than the disgust. "Were you that eager? Couldn't even wait one more day?" He leaned down, his cold fingers gripping her chin tightly, forcing her to look up. "Sarah, look at me. Tell me, did you ever love me? Even for a second?" The rain blurred her vision. She looked at the face before her, a face she had once been infatuated with. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand, aching to the point of shattering. Love? How could she not love him? Loved him enough to bear all the ugliness alone, loved him enough to let him misunderstand and hate her, rather than let him see her die in such a wretched state. But she couldn't speak. Her silence, in Robert Sterling's eyes, was an admission. The last flicker of light in his eyes was completely extinguished, replaced by a deathly coldness. He abruptly threw her chin aside with such force that she staggered back several steps, hitting the cold iron gate hard. "Get out." A single word, like a final judgment. Sarah watched him turn, closing the door without a second glance, completely shutting her and her world out into the cold, rainy night. That heavy door felt like an eternal barrier, separating life and death, love and hate. Her body finally gave out, slowly sliding down the cold iron gate to the ground. The rain washed over her mercilessly, the chill seeping into her bones. She curled in to a ball, the sobs she had suppressed for so long finally breaking free, turning into a desperate cry of pain. How did it come to this? They used to be so good together. Sarah first met Robert Sterling at an art exhibition. She was an unknown student from the Art Institute, barely getting by on part-time jobs and meager scholarships. He was the highly regarded heir to the Sterling Group, distinguished and aloof, like a star suspended high in the sky, unreachable. She accidentally brushed her palette against his expensive suit, turning pale with fright and apologizing profusely. He merely glanced at her, his eyes deep and distant, but unexpectedly, he didn't scold her, just said, "Be careful next time," before turning and leaving. Sarah thought it was a trivial accident, never imagining that the gears of fate had already begun to turn. A few days later, Robert Sterling unexpectedly appeared at her studio. That cramped attic studio, filled with art supplies and smelling of turpentine, felt entirely out of place with his aura. He stood before her unfinished painting of a lonely lighthouse at sunset and looked at it for a long time. "I'll buy this painting." His voice was low, carrying an undeniable power. Sarah was stunned. The painting held a special meaning for her. The lighthouse was a symbol of loneliness and resilience in her heart, a faint light deep within her. "I'm sorry, sir, this painting. I'll offer 10 times the price," Robert Sterling interrupted her, his gaze falling on her paint-stained fingers. "Or, you can name your terms." Sarah looked at him, suddenly finding the courage to speak. "I don't want money. If you truly like it, then, just come and see it often." A flicker of surprise crossed Robert Sterling's eyes, then the corner of his lips curved into a faint smile. It was a subtle smile, but like a stone dropped into a calm lake, it sent ripples across her heart. From that day on, Robert Sterling truly became a regular at her studio. He would bring expensive coffee and pastries, sitting quietly in a corner, watching her paint. Sometimes, he would stay for an entire afternoon. He didn't talk much, but his presence alone was like a warm beam of light, illuminating her previously gray and confined world. Their relationship gradually warmed in a subtle understanding. He brought her into a world she had never imagined: lavish galas, private parties, fast sports cars. She was like a thorn bird that had strayed into a crystal palace, cautious yet unable to resist being drawn to the glittering light. Everyone said she wasn't good enough for Robert Sterling, that she was just a temporary plaything for Mr. Sterling. The gossip stung her like needles, but Robert Sterling's protection and tenderness were the most effective pain relievers. At family gatherings, he would hold her hand tightly in front of everyone and announce that she was his girlfriend. He would quietly come to her rescue when she was being difficult. He would remember her casually mentioned preferences and would stubbornly wait downstairs when she returned late from painting, just to see her get inside safely. Sarah, he had held her close, his chin resting on the top of her head, his voice low and gentle. "Don't listen to anyone else. When you're with me, you just need to be yourself." At that time, Sarah truly believed she was the happiest person in the world. She was immersed in the love and protection Robert Sterling gave her, almost forgetting who she was, forgetting the undercurrents hidden beneath the calm surface of her life. Until that day, she started having frequent nosebleeds. At first, she thought it was poor ventilation in the studio, then came unexplained fatigue and low fever. Until one day, she suddenly fainted in front of her easel and was taken to the hospital. After a series of tests, the doctor held the report form and told her in a very serious and regretful tone, "Miss Lynn, it's acute myeloid leukemia. The situation isn't very optimistic." At that moment, Sarah felt her entire world collapse. She was only 23. Her life had just begun, and the canvas of her future with Robert Sterling was just unfolding. The shadow of death, like a giant net, unexpectedly enveloped her. The doctor said she needed chemotherapy as soon as possible, followed by finding a suitable bone marrow match for a transplant. But even then, the success rate wasn't 100%, the treatment process would be very painful, and the cost would be astronomical. Sarah held the thin diagnosis report, her hands shaking so much she could barely hold it. She walked out of the hospital and looked at the busy world outside, feeling a sense of utter loneliness and despair for the first time. She thought of Robert Sterling, the man who said he would protect her for a lifetime. But how could she tell him? Tell him that the girl he loved would soon become unrecognizable, losing her hair, gaunt and withered, struggling through pain and treatment every day, perhaps even dying at any moment? How could she bear to let him see her at her most pathetic? How could she bear to drag him into this bottomless abyss? Robert Sterling's mother had always disliked her, thinking she was from a humble background and not good enough for the Sterling family. If she knew she had such a disease, what would she think? How much pressure would Robert Sterling have to bear? No, she couldn't. Rather than let him endure all of that, it would be better to let him hate her. Hate, at least, was more dignified than pity and compassion. A desperate and painful plan slowly formed in her mind. She began to deliberately distance herself from Robert Sterling. She made excuses to refuse his dates and became increasingly cold towards him. She moved out of the apartment he had prepared for her and returned to that cramped studio. Robert Sterling noticed the change. He pressed her, he questioned her, he even lowered himself to beg. "Sarah, what's wrong? Tell me." He blocked the studio door, his eyes showing a hurt and bewilderment she had never seen before. "Is there something I did wrong? Tell me, and I'll change." Sarah's heart ached as if it were being sliced by a knife. She almost couldn't help but throw herself into his arms and tell him the truth. But looking at his deep, worried eyes, she finally clenched her teeth and forced herself to say the words that went against her heart. "Robert Sterling, we're not right for each other." She turned her face away, afraid to meet his eyes, her voice as calm as possible, yet with an undetectable tremor. "Matching backgrounds, the old sayings have a point. Your world, I can't fit into it. Let's just call it quits." Call it quits? Robert Sterling's voice suddenly rose, filled with disbelief and anger. Sarah, tell me what's right? We've been together for so long, and now you're telling me we're not right? Yes, I don't love you anymore. To make him completely give up, she forced herself to say the cruelest words. I'm tired, I'm bored. The life I want, you can't give me. She watched the light in his eyes shatter little by little, saw his tightly clenched fists turn white at the knuckles from the force. Say that again, his voice was hoarse, like a cornered beast. I said, I don't love you anymore. Sarah closed her eyes, silent tears falling, her heart aching numbly. Let's break up. That day, Robert Sterling stormed out. She listened to the roar of his sports car engine fade into the distance at the street corner, and finally, unable to stand any longer, she collapsed to the ground and wept despairingly. She knew she had personally severed all possibilities between them. To make him completely give up, and also to raise the exorbitant treatment costs, she began accepting some commercial painting commissions, and even accepted Mrs. Sterling's suggestion. Mrs. Sterling found her, her words full of condescending charity and disdain. Leave Robert, and I can give you a sum of money, enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Or, I can arrange for you to go abroad and never appear in front of him again. Sarah looked at the check. The amount was indeed tempting, enough to pay for her first phase of chemotherapy. She knew Mrs. Sterling's intention was simply to humiliate her with money, to make her completely give up hope. She needed the money. She needed to live. Even if it meant living without dignity. She accepted the check. She thought Robert Sterling would never know about this. But she never expected that Mrs. Sterling, wanting her son to be completely disappointed in her, would accidentally reveal this matter to Robert Sterling. And so, the scene at the beginning unfolded. Robert Sterling holding the photos, accusing her of using his money to support another man. He didn't know that the money was his mother's breakup fee to buy out their relationship, and she used this money, stained with humiliation, to pay for life-saving chemotherapy bills. He also didn't know that the man in the photo was her doctor, the only person who could give her professional help while she was fighting against death. All the pain, sacrifice, and deep love were twisted into betrayal and disgrace. And she couldn't even offer a single explanation. Because the truth would only be more cruel. The night Robert Sterling turned her away, Sarah didn't know how she got back to the hospital. She was like a body without a soul, letting the cold rain and despair drown her. High fever accompanied by violent coughing, she was unconscious for 2 full days. When she woke, the sunlight outside the window was blinding, and the hospital room was filled with the strong smell of antiseptic. Sitting by her bed was her attending physician, Dr. Thomas Miller. The M. And in the photo, you're awake? How are you feeling? Dr. Miller handed her a cup of warm water, his eyes filled with concern. You ran out that day, got drenched in the rain, had a high fever that wouldn't break, and almost developed pneumonia. Sarah took the water cup, her fingertips cold. She moved her chapped lips, wanting to say something, but only managed a hoarse gasp. Don't talk, just rest, Dr. Miller sighed. I've already contacted the bone marrow registry for you, but matching takes time. The most important thing for you now is to maintain a good mindset and physical condition. Sarah nodded, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Mindset? What mindset was there left for her? Robert Sterling's cold, disgusted eyes were etched in her mind like a brand, refusing to fade. A few days later, Sarah was barely able to get out of bed. She opened her phone, and the overwhelming news notifications delivered another heavy blow to her already fragile heart. Sterling Group heir Robert Sterling makes high-profile appearance with new companion at charity gala, rumored to be announcing engagement soon. The news photo showed Robert Sterling in a perfectly tailored black suit, handsome and tall, a faint smile on his lips. Standing beside him was a woman in a white evening gown, elegant and poised, Catherine White, a well-known socialite, the daughter of the White family. In the photo, Robert Sterling was slightly turned, looking at Catherine White, his gaze focused, even with a hint of tenderness. Sarah's heart felt as if it had been pierced by countless needles simultaneously, a dense, throbbing pain. So quickly, he had found a replacement. That woman, from a prominent family, beautiful and accomplished, looked so perfectly matched with him. Unlike her, humble as dust, and suffering from a terminal illness. Perhaps, this was the life he should have. Without her as a burden, he would be better off. She told herself this over and over, trying to numb the gnawing pain. But the tears still fell uncontrollably, splashing onto the phone screen, blurring the dazzling image. Blows followed one after another. Due to the previous drenching and high fever, coupled with severe emotional fluctuations, Sarah's condition worsened. The side effects of chemotherapy became more apparent: vomiting, hair loss, weakness. She looked at herself in the mirror, pale-faced, sparse-haired, sunken-eyed, feeling incredibly strange and afraid. Even worse, the money was running out. The money Mrs. Sterling had given her was a drop in the bucket compared to the exorbitant treatment costs. She sold every painting she could from her studio, including the one with special meaning for her, the lighthouse. But it still wasn't enough. She started falling behind on medical bills. The hospital's collection notices arrived one after another, like grim reminders. Dr. Miller noticed her predicament and offered help several times, but she refused him. She didn't want to owe anyone else, especially, she didn't want to be involved in Robert Sterling's world anymore. Dr. Miller was Robert Sterling's college classmate. Although they didn't keep in close contact now, he still belonged to that circle. Despair washed over her like a tide. She even started thinking, should she just give up? Death, perhaps, would be an end to it all. No more pain, no more burdening anyone. Just as Sarah was on the verge of collapse, her good friend, and a mutual friend of hers and Robert Sterling, Vivian, found her at the hospital. Vivian looked at the gaunt and weary Sarah in the hospital bed, too shocked to speak. "Sarah, how could you?" Vivian held her cold hand, her eyes instantly red. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick? Why didn't you tell Robert Sterling?" Sarah shook her head weakly. "Don't tell him." "Why wouldn't you tell him?" Vivian was anxious. "He's been looking everywhere for you. He thought you really betrayed him. He's with Catherine White now, half out of spite, half forced by his family. He can't let go of you at all." "Can't let go?" Sarah's heart gave a violent tremor, then was drowned in bitterness. What difference did it make if he couldn't let go? What right did she have now to stand by his side? "Vivian, please, don't tell him." Sarah gripped Vivian's hand, her eyes pleading. "Let him hate me. That way, he can forget me and live well." Vivian looked at the determination and pain in her eyes, her heart aching unbearably. She knew Sarah's stubbornness and vaguely guessed her concerns. "Okay, I won't tell him." Vivian took a deep breath. "But Sarah, you can't give up on treatment. I'll figure out the money." Vivian was a loyal friend and came from a decent family. But Sarah's illness was a bottomless pit. She could help for a while, but not forever. Ultimately, Vivian couldn't hold back and went to see Robert Sterling. She didn't reveal the truth about the leukemia, but hinted that Sarah hadn't been well lately, seemed to be sick, and asked him to visit her if he had time. However, Robert Sterling's reaction chilled her to the bone. "Sick?" Robert Sterling sneered, his eyes filled with undisguised mockery. "Another one of her pathetic tricks? She'll really stop at nothing to get me back. Vivian, don't let her fool you." Mrs. Sterling's previous embellished reporting, coupled with Sarah's resolute breakup and the photo of betrayal, had planted deep suspicion and resentment in Robert Sterling's heart. He was convinced that Sarah had left him for money and a better future, and now the so-called sickness was just a trick to try and get back with him because she regretted it. "Robert Sterling, how could you think that of her?" Vivian trembled with anger. "She's not that kind of person." "Not what kind of person?" Robert Sterling's voice was icy cold. "She abandoned me for money, betrayed me for another ma. And, what else is she incapable of?" Vivian looked at the man before her, his face distorted by pain and anger, feeling him utterly alien for the first time. She knew there was no point in saying anything more. Sarah's sacrifice and concealment had created an unsolvable knot. Misunderstanding, like a deep, unfathomable chasm, lay between them, growing wider and wider. Sarah's health deteriorated day by day. The doctor told her she needed a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible, otherwise, there wasn't much time left. Fortunately, news came from the bone marrow registry that a preliminary match had been found. But unfortunately, the transplant surgery and subsequent treatment would require a massive amount of money. Vivian scraped together what she could, but it was only a small portion. Sarah lay in the hospital room, looking out at the gray sky, feeling a despair she had never known before. Was she really going to reach the end of the line? Just then, Dr. Miller came to see her again and handed her a bank card. "Sarah, take this money for now. I know your concerns, but this isn't my money. It was anonymously donated to a foundation by one of my patients, specifically designated to help young patients with blood diseases. You meet the criteria." Dr. Miller's tone was gentle, trying to dispel her doubts. Sarah looked at the card, hesitating for a long time. She knew this might be her last hope. But, just as she was about to accept it, an unexpected person appeared at the hospital room door: Catherine White. Catherine White was still elegant and proper, with a well-practiced smile on her face, but her eyes held a hint of subtle scrutiny and pity. "Miss Lynn, I heard you were ill. I've come to see you on behalf of Robert." Catherine White placed a beautifully wrapped bouquet of flowers on the bedside table, her voice soft, yet every word was a jab to the heart. "Robert is very busy lately. He asked me to tell you that the past is in the past. I hope you take care of yourself." Sarah's heart felt as if something had sharply pierced it. On behalf of Robert? He had finally learned she was sick. But he hadn't come. He had sent his fiancée to deliver an irrelevant greeting. Catherine White's gaze fell on the bank card Dr. Miller had placed on the bedside table, and she raised an eyebrow slightly. "Miss Lynn, if you have any difficulties, you can tell me. After all, you and Robert were acquainted once." The condescending tone in her voice made Sarah straighten her back instantly. No. She couldn't accept this kind of help. She couldn't let her last shred of dignity vanish in front of these people. She pushed the bank card back to Dr. Miller, her voice weak but resolute. "Thank you, Dr. Miller. But I can't take this money." Then, she looked at Catherine White and managed a pale smile. "Please thank Mr. Sterling for his concern on my behalf. We have nothing to do with each other anymore. Please tell Miss White, I wish him happiness." A flicker of surprise crossed Catherine White's eyes, then she regained her composure. "I'll relay that. Miss Lynn, get some rest." After Catherine White left, Sarah could no longer hold back. She covered her face and sobbed silently. She had made her final decision. She would sell her last, and most precious, possession, the ring Robert Sterling had given her. It was a simple platinum ring, with their initials MX engraved on the inside. Robert Sterling had put it on her finger himself when they were deeply in love. He said it was his promise to her. She had worn it constantly, close to her skin, even after they broke up, even after he had so terribly misunderstood her. Now, she would sell it herself, exchanging it for a chance to live. Wasn't this a kind of irony? Using the symbol of his promise to pay for the life-saving money needed because she had left him. She found a reputable jewelry store and tremblingly handed the ring to the clerk. When the price was quoted, enough to cover the surgery fee, she felt no joy, only a hollow numbness in her heart. The date for the surgery was set. Sarah signed a thick stack of surgical consent forms and risk disclosure forms. Every possible complication and risk was like a cold needle piercing her fragile nerves. The night before the surgery, Vivian stayed with her. "Sarah, don't be afraid, everything will be all right." Vivian held her hand, trying to give her strength. Sarah managed a weak smile, her face pale as paper. She knew the surgery was high risk. She had even secretly written a farewell letter and hidden it under her pillow. If she didn't make it off the operating table, she hoped Vivian would give it to. No, better not give it to him. Let him keep hating her. It was better than the pain and guilt he would feel if he knew the truth. On the day of the surgery, Sarah was wheeled into the operating room. The cold lights shone on her face, and various machines emitted monotonous beeping sounds. Anesthetic was injected into her body, and her consciousness gradually blurred. Before she lost consciousness, the last image that flashed in her mind was Robert Sterling's face. The face that had once been infinitely gentle towards her, but now held only coldness and disgust. "Robert Sterling, if I can survive, is there still a chance for us?" "No, it's impossible." The surgery was not smooth. Sarah's already weak body experienced severe rejection reactions and complications during the procedure. The heart rate monitor emitted a piercing alarm, and the operating room was in a frantic state. Dr. Miller and all the medical staff were doing everything they could to save her. And at that moment, outside the operating room, Robert Sterling arrived. It was Vivian. After Sarah was wheeled into surgery, she finally couldn't hold back and called him. "Robert Sterling. Sarah is having bone marrow transplant surgery. She's not doing well. Even if you hate her, come and see her one last time." Vivian cried into the phone. When Robert Sterling received the call, he was finalizing the details of his engagement party with Catherine White. Hearing the words bone marrow transplant and not doing well, he felt like he had been struck by lightning, his mind a blank. He rushed out of the hotel like a madman, speeding to the hospital. When he burst through the operating room doors, drenched, it was raining again outside, and pale-faced, all he saw was the tightly closed door and the red "surgery in progress" light. Vivian saw him and rushed forward, hitting him hard. "Robert Sterling, you bastard. Do you know why she broke up with you? She has leukemia. She didn't want to be a burden to you. She even sold your ring to pay for the surgery. And you thought she was seeing someone else? Do you have any idea how hurtful your words were? Leukemia, didn't want to burden him, sold the ring." Every word was like a red-hot iron, searing his heart. The details he had deliberately ignored, her increasingly pale face, her hesitant eyes, the distance he had interpreted as boredom and betrayal. This was the truth. He had always thought he was the victim, the one who was abandoned and betrayed. But it turned out he was the most cruel executioner. It was he, when she needed him most, who had dealt her the most devastating blow. Immense regret and pain, like a tsunami, completely overwhelmed Robert Sterling. He stumbled back a few steps, leaning against the cold wall, his body trembling violently. He wanted to rush in, to see her, to tell her he was wrong, that he knew everything now. But that door separated two worlds. He was outside, heartbroken with regret, while she was inside, struggling between life and death. So close, yet worlds apart. The surgery lasted for over 10 hours. When the operating room light finally went out, Robert Sterling lunged forward. Dr. Miller walked out, his body weary, removing his mask, his face grave. The surgery was temporarily successful. But Dr. Miller looked at Robert Sterling, his eyes complex. The patient's condition is very unstable. The rejection reaction is severe, and she's not out of danger yet. The next 48 hours are critical. Temporarily successful, not out of danger. Robert Sterling's heart felt like it was being fried in hot oil. Sarah was moved to the ICU, tubes attached all over her body, connected to cold machines. She lay there quietly, fragile as a porcelain doll that could break at any moment. Robert Sterling stood behind the thick glass window, looking at her paper-white face, his heart twisting in pain. He finally knew the whole truth. From Vivian's tearful confession, from Dr. Miller's fragmented explanations later, he pieced together everything Sarah had endured alone. Her illness, her fear, her sacrifice, her forbearance, the betrayal she chose to avoid burdening him, the humiliation she suffered to stay alive. And him? He had used the most vicious words to hurt her, the coldest attitude to destroy her last hope. It was he who had personally pushed her into a deeper abyss. Boundless regret and self-reproach gnawed at his insides like poisonous snakes. He wished he could slap himself, wished he could bear all her pain for her. But it was too late. The damage done could not be erased, and the words spoken could not be taken back. The only thing he could do now was stay here and pray that she would pull through. Sarah remained in the ICU for 3 days and 3 nights. During those 3 days, Robert Sterling stayed outside, never leaving. He refused all visitors, including Catherine White. His engagement to the White family, the moment he learned the truth, had been unilaterally broken off by him. He stood there like a statue, silently by the glass window, his gaze fixed on the fragile figure inside. His face was expressionless, only the bottomless pain and despair in his eyes. He prayed repeatedly in his heart. As long as she woke up, as long as she lived, he was willing to pay any price. He would make it up to her, spend the rest of his life loving her, compensating her for the suffering she had endured. On the 4th day, Sarah finally woke from her coma. Her consciousness was still blurry. She slowly opened her eyes, seeing the white ceiling and smelling the strong scent of disinfectant. She moved her fingers, feeling the tubes connected to her body. She was alive. This realization brought little joy, only a heavy fatigue. She turned her head and saw the familiar yet unfamiliar figure through the glass window. Robert Sterling. He saw her wake up too. His eyes instantly blazed with wild joy, which was immediately replaced by intense pain and guilt. He practically rushed towards the hospital room door, but was stopped by a nurse. The patient just woke up. She needs rest and shouldn't be agitated. Robert Sterling stopped, looking at her deeply through the glass. His lips moved, as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Sarah looked at him as well. His eyes were no longer filled with cold disgust, but with pain, regret, and cautious pleading. She knew. He must know everything now. But what did it matter, knowing? Could a shattered mirror be put back together? Could a heart that had been broken so completely be mended? She slowly closed her eyes, turning her head away, refusing to look at him anymore. That action was like an invisible knife, stabbing hard into Robert Sterling's heart. He understood what she meant. She didn't want to see him. She still hated him. Or, she had completely given up. Over the next few days, Sarah's condition gradually stabilized, and she was moved to a regular hospital room. But her mood remained extremely ill. Ow. She didn't talk, didn't interact with anyone, and showed a passive resistance to treatment. She was like a flower that had lost all its vitality, slowly withering. Robert Sterling came every day. He no longer tried to force his way into the room, just quietly waited outside, or had Vivian bring her the bland food he had personally prepared, the kind she used to love. But Sarah never touched it. He tried everything to see her, to say I'm sorry to her in person. Finally, one time, taking advantage of the nurse's rounds, he slipped into the hospital room. Sarah was leaning against the headboard, staring out the window. Hearing footsteps, she turned her head, saw it was him, her eyes devoid of any ripple, only a dead calm. Sarah. Robert Sterling's voice was hoarse and dry, thick with emotion. I'm sorry. Get out, Sarah interrupted him, her voice terrifyingly calm, without any emotional fluctuation. Sarah, please let me explain. I don't want to hear it. Sarah looked at him, her eyes empty. Robert Sterling, we're over. It ended the moment I decided to leave you. No. It's not over. Robert Sterling stepped forward impulsively, wanting to grab her hand. Sarah, I know I was wrong. I know everything now. Please, give me another chance, let me make it up to you, okay? Sarah looked at his outstretched hand and instinctively flinched back. That movement sent Robert Sterling's heart plummeting to the bottom. Make it up? Sarah gave a soft laugh, a sound more painful than crying. How will you make it up? Make up for the nights I was misunderstood and humiliated by you? Make up for the fear of struggling to survive alone in the hospital? Make up for my heart, riddled with holes from your words? With every sentence she spoke, Robert Sterling's face grew a shade paler. Robert Sterling, it's too late. Sarah's voice was very quiet, but it hit him like a heavy hammer. I just don't want to love anymore. It's too exhausting. Looking at his agonizing face, her heart was not entirely unaffected. But the wounds were too deep, like scars etched onto bone, forever indelible. She no longer had the strength to endure the possibility of another separation and heartbreak. Please leave. Sarah closed her eyes again. Don't come back anymore. I want to be alone, quietly. Robert Sterling stood frozen, looking at her resolute profile, his blood seeming to congeal. He knew. This time, she truly didn't want him anymore. Not out of spite, not playing hard to get, but a complete, heartfelt giving up. He had lost. Lost utterly. He had personally destroyed everything between them. Boundless despair, like a dark tide, completely swallowed him. He even felt an urge to just perish with her. But he couldn't. He hadn't atoned yet. He stumbled out of the hospital room, each step feeling like treading on razor blades. Reaching the end of the corridor, he finally couldn't bear it any longer, sliding down the wall to the floor, burying his head deep in his arms, letting out suppressed, painful sobs. Like a wounded beast, alone in the abyss of despair, licking wounds that would never heal. Sarah ultimately could not overcome the illness. The post-bone marrow transplant rejection reactions and complications were relentless, like an endless war, draining her last bit of life force. Her body weakened day by day, her consciousness often fading into a blur. Robert Sterling, ignoring her refusal, stubbornly stayed in her hospital room. He awkwardly learned to care for her, wiping her down, feeding her water, and when she was conscious, softly reading her favorite poetry collections. Most of the time, Sarah kept her eyes closed, not responding, not resisting, as if he were just an irrelevant presence. Only occasionally, when her consciousness was slightly clearer, seeing his bloodshot eyes and gaunt face, a hint of extremely complex emotion would flash in her eyes, like pity, or perhaps helplessness. Robert Sterling caught those glances, his heart twisting, yet a fragile hope sparked within him. Did she still care about him a little? However, reality was cruel. On a late autumn morning, sunlight filtered through the window, casting a thin, warm glow. Sarah's breathing became increasingly shallow. The numbers on the life monitor dropped slowly and mercilessly. Robert Sterling held her cold hand tightly, his own trembling uncontrollably. Sarah. Sarah. He called her name over and over, his voice choked. Don't go to sleep, please, look at me. Sarah seemed to hear his call. With difficulty, she opened her eyes. Her gaze was unfocused, but she struggled to focus on his face. She looked at him, for a long, long time. Then, she used her last ounce of strength and gently moved her lips. Robert Sterling immediately leaned down, putting his ear close to her lips. He heard her say, Robert Sterling, forget me, live, well. These were her last words to him. After she finished speaking, her eyes slowly closed, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile, like relief, lingered on her lips. The life monitor emitted a piercing wail, and the screen became a cold, flat line. The world, at that moment, stood completely still. Robert Sterling froze there, as if all his soul had been drained away. He stared blankly at her peaceful face in death, tears streaming silently from his eyes, scalding as they hit her cold hand. He had lost her forever. Just when he finally understood everything, wanting to spend the rest of his life making amends. She didn't even give him a chance for redemption. It was still raining the day of the funeral. Not heavily, but a lingering, mournful drizzle, like grief that could never be fully cried out. Robert Sterling stood before the tombstone in a black suit, like a petrified statue. On the tombstone was Sarah's young, gentle smiling face, a black and white photo that seemed to freeze the most beautiful moments of her life. Vivian walked over and handed him a journal. "This is Sarah's journal. She asked me to give it to you." Vivian's voice was thick with emotion. "She said she hoped that after you read it, you would be able to let go." Robert Sterling trembled as he took the slightly worn book. He opened the first page. It was her familiar, elegant handwriting, recording the summer they met. Between the lines was a girl's pure and fervent love. He turned the pages, one by one, seeing her struggles, her fear, the pain of her decision to leave, the difficulty of her solitary fight against the illness, and the love for him that had never changed, yet was forced by reality to be buried deep within her heart. "Robert, I'm sorry. Forgive my selfishness for choosing to leave you this way. I just didn't want you to see my final state. Please, you must be happy. Chemotherapy was rough today, threw up all day. I wish you were holding me, like you used to. But I can't go back. Saw the news about you and Miss White. She's beautiful, and she's a good match for you." "That's good. You should be happy." Robert Sterling. "Still need a lot for the surgery fee. I sold the ring." "I'm sorry, Robert, it was your promise to me, but I used it to buy my life." He came. "He knows everything now," he cried. Seeing him in so much pain, my heart aches too. "But we can't go back. We really can't go back. If there's a next life, I don't want to meet you again. It's too painful." The last page of the journal had only one sentence, the ink seeming blurred by tears. "Robert Sterling, I love you." I never stopped. Robert Sterling could no longer hold back. He covered his face, letting out heart-wrenching sobs. Rain mixed with tears, blurring his vision. He finally understood. Sarah's last words, "Forget me," weren't hate, but a final act of tenderness. She wanted him to let go, wanted him to live well. But how could he forget? Her love, her pain, her sacrifice, her dying wish for him to live well, were like an indelible brand, deeply etched into his soul, to accompany him through every day and night of his remaining life. He had gained her truth, but he had lost her forever. There was no crueler punishment in this world. He would spend a long lifetime, savoring this belated truth, bearing this eternal regret, walking alone in a world without her. The rain continued to fall, as if it would never end.